In this lecture, we will continue Chapter 7, Nature and Type of Audit Evidence. Types of audit evidence includes physical examination, confirmation, inspection, analytical procedures, client inquiries, recalculation, reperformance, observation. Let's start with physical examination. Physical examination is the inspection or count by the auditor of a tangible asset. This type of evidence is most often associated with inventory. The second type of audit evidence is confirmation. Confirmation describes the receipt of a direct written response from a third party, verifying the accuracy of information that was requested by the auditor. The request is made to the client, and the client asks the third party to respond directly to the auditor. And because confirmation come from third-party sources instead of the client, they are a highly regarded and often used type of evidence. However, confirmations are relatively costly to obtain and may cause some inconvenience to those asked to supply them. Therefore, they are not used in every instance in which they are applicable. These are information often confirmed for assets and liabilities, owner's equity, and other information, and the sources of information from the third party. The third type of audit evidence is inspection. Inspection is the auditor's examination of the client's documents and records to substantiate the information that is or should be included in the financial statement. The documents examined by the auditor are the records used by the client to provide information for conducting its business in an organized manner, and may be in paper form, electronic form, or other media. For example, the client often retain a customer order, a shipping document, and a duplicate sales invoice for each sales transaction. These same documents are useful in evidence for the auditor to verify the accuracy of the client's records for sales transactions. Documentation is widely used as evidence in audits because it is usually readily available at a relatively low cost. Although documents can be conveniently classified as internal and external, an internal document has been prepared and used within the client's organization and is retained without ever going to an outside party. Internal documents include duplicate sales invoices, employees' time reports, and inventory receiving reports, while external documents has been handled by someone outside the client's organization, which is a party to the transaction being documented, but that is either currently held by the clients or readily accessible. It is worth to note that there is a distinction in auditing between the inspection or physical examination of assets and the inspection of documents. While is related The inspection of documents is related to the audit type, which is inspection, while the physical examination of tangible assets is related to physical examination. An important point is when auditors use documentation to support record transactions or amounts, the process is often called vouching. And to vouch recorded acquisition transactions, the auditor might, for example, verify entries in the acquisition journal by examining supporting vendors' invoices and receiving reports and thereby satisfying the occurrence objective. If the auditor traces from receiving reports to the acquisition journal to satisfy the completeness objective, this later process is called tracing. In summary, vouching, we are moving backward or tracing backward from journal entry to the economic event or the transaction. And vouching is used to test existence or occurrence objective, while tracing forward from transaction or economic event to the journal entry is mainly used for testing the completeness audit objective. Analytical procedures are defined by auditing standards as evaluations of financial information through analysis of plausible relationships among financial and non-financial data. For example, an auditor may compare the gross margin percent in the current year with the preceding year's gross margin. Analytical procedures are used extensively in practice and are required during the planning and completion phases on all audits. There are different types of analytical procedures that require understand the client's industry and business, assess the entity abilities to continue as a going concern, indicate the presence of possible misstatements in the financial statements, provide evidence supporting an account balance to reduce detailed audit tests. The fifth type of audit evidence is inquiries of the client. Inquiry is the obtaining of written and or oral information from the client in response to questions from the auditor. Although considerable evidence is obtained from the client through inquiry, it usually cannot be regarded as conclusive because it is not from an independent source and may be biased in the client favor. Therefore, when the auditor obtains evidence through inquiry, it is normally necessary to obtain corroborating evidence through other procedures. Corroborating evidence is additional evidence to support the original evidence. Recalculations. Recalculation involves rechecking a sample of calculations made by the client. Rechecking client calculations consists of testing the client's arithmetical accuracy and includes such procedures as extending sales invoices and inventory, adding journals and subsidiary records, and checking the calculation of depreciation expense and the prepaid expenses. And we should note that a considerable portion of auditors' recalculation is done using spreadsheet or audit software. Reperformance is the auditor's independent tests of clients' accounting procedures or controls that were originally done as part of the entity's accounting and internal control system. An important point is whereas recalculation involves rechecking a computation, reperformance involves checking other procedures. For example, the auditor may compare the price on an invoice to an approved price list, or may reperform the aging of accounts receivable. Another type of reperformance is for the auditor to recheck transfers of information by tracing information included in more than one place to verify that it is recorded at the same amount each time. The last type of audit evidence is observation, which is the use of one's senses to assess clients' activities. It consists of looking at a process or procedure being performed by others. The auditor may tour the planet to obtain a general impression of the client's facilities, or watch individuals performing accounting tasks to determine whether the person assigned a responsibility is performing it properly. Observation provides evidence about the performance of a process or procedure, but is limited to the point in time at which the observation takes place. Observation is rarely sufficient by itself. because of the risk of the client personally changing their behavior because of the auditor's presence. They may perform their responsibilities in accordance with company policy, but resume normal activity once the auditor is not in sight. Therefore, it is necessary to follow up initial impressions with other kinds of corroborating evidence. The appropriateness of types of evidence is linked to the types of audit evidence we discussed here as physical examination. It is highly independent because of the independence of the provider. Also, the effectiveness of client's internal controls varies, but it is directly related to the auditor's direct knowledge, and the provider of the information is normally high because the auditor himself did the physical examination, and the objectivity of evidence is usually high. For confirmation, the independence of provider is very high. Confirmation has no relationship to the effectiveness of the client's internal controls. Although confirmation is beyond auditor's direct knowledge, but confirmation may varies due to different qualifications of the provider, but it is usually high, and the objectivity of evidence is very high. Inspection, usually external documents are more independent than internal documents. Inspection also depends on the effectiveness of client's internal controls. The auditor's direct knowledge is low, and the qualification of provider varies according to the information written or the documents exist. But inspection has a very high objectivity because it is a direct inspection of documents and records. For the analytical procedures, the independence of provider depends on the auditor and the client respond. The effectiveness of client's internal controls varies, and the auditor's direct knowledge is according to the financial and non-financial information, but the qualifications of provider is normally high, but analytical procedures cannot be considered as an objective types of audit evidence. Inquiries of the client, the provider is not independent. The inquiries is not related to the effectiveness of client's internal control, and the auditor has no direct knowledge about the responses to the inquiries, and the provider of the information has different qualifications, but the objectivity of evidence varies from low to high. It's subject to the credibility of the information and the responses of participants. Recalculation, the independence of the provider is very high. Recalculating financial information varies according to the effectiveness of client's internal controls and according to the direct knowledge is very high because he is verifying the mathematical accuracy, and the qualifications of the provider is very high because the auditor himself doing this process, and the objectivity of audit evidence is very high. Reperformance has the same criteria as recalculation. Observation has the same criteria, but for the objectivity of evidence is medium. The application of types of evidence to the three evidence decisions. The type of evidence here is observation. The audit procedure is to observe the client's personnel, counting inventory to determine whether they are properly following instructions. The sample size, all count teams, items to select not applicable since we are not depending here on a sample. The timing on the balance sheet date. For physical examination, count a sample of inventory and compare quantity and description to client's count. For example, a sample size of 120 items. Items to select 40 items with larger dollar value plus 80 randomly selected. And the timing is on the balance sheet date. For inspection, the audit procedure is to compare quantity on client's perpetual records to quantify to quantity on client's count. The sample size is 70 items, and the items to select 30 items with larger dollar value plus 40 randomly selected, and also the timing is on the balance sheet date. This table includes keywords that are related to each type of evidence. For example, when we say examine, we are referring to inspection. Read is also related to inspection. Compare and vouch, all these four terms are related to inspection. Analytical procedures, the key words are scan and compute. For recalculation, when we recompute or footing means we calculate the totals of debit and the credit side. Inquiries of the client, the main keyword is inquire. Understand the purposes of audit documentation. Audit documentation is the record of the audit procedures performed, relevant audit evidence, and the conclusions the auditor reached. The audit documentation includes purposes of audit documentation, ownership of audit files, confidentiality of audit files, requirements for retention of audit documentation. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act requires auditors of public companies to prepare and maintain audit working papers for a period of not less than 7 years. The audit file contents and organization includes financial statements and audit report, working trial balance, adjusting journal entries, contingent liabilities, operations, liabilities and equity, assets, analytical procedures, tests of controls and substantive tests of transactions, internal control, general information, audit programs, and permanent files. Permanent files are the files that intended to contain data of historical or continuing nature pertinent to the current audit. But the current files include audit program, general information, working trial balance, adjusting and reclassification entries, and supporting schedules. The cost of types of evidence. The two most expensive types of evidence are physical examination and confirmation. Physical examination is costly because it normally requires the auditor's presence when the client is counting the asset, often on the balance sheet date. Confirmation is costly because the auditor must follow careful procedures in the confirmation preparation, transmittal, receipt, and in the follow-up of non-responses and exceptions. In section, analytical procedures and reperformance are moderately costly. For example, it may be far less expensive to calculate and review sales and accounts receivable ratio than to confirm accounts receivable. The three last expensive types of evidence are observation, inquiries of the client, and recalculation. And it is important to note that observation and inquiries are not sufficient audit evidence and need additional audit evidence.